People think they can't afford a home.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's talk about that first. So, I'm on the news here quite a bit,
Yeah.
and I was walking out, and there was one of the young, he's like 40, so I call him young, guys that just we were just chit chatting, getting a cup of coffee, and he says, I feel like I'm never going to be able to afford a home.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, when do you get off work? And he says, I'm actually just finishing now. And I said, let me take you to breakfast. So there's a little diner right across the street. So I took him to the diner and I sat him down and I said, what's your problem? And he says, well, I rent right now and it's this little tiny studio and it's $1,800 a month. And he says, I look at Zillow for something, and it's $4,400 a month. And I said, and he just says, well, I'm done. I can't afford it. And I said, well, let's talk about that. And I walked him through all of the elements of home ownership and all of the advantages. Like, for example, part of that $4,400 is principal. Well, principal goes toward the house. So I call it a forced savings account. It goes from your checking account into your asset, the home that you own. It's still your money. So if it's still your money and it's just in a, call it a savings account, is it an expense? And he said, no. So I subtracted that out. And I said, all right, then you have the interest and the taxes. And I did the calculations and I asked him what tax bracket is. When you go state, federal, FICO, FICA, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, blah, blah, like how much money is getting taken out of your check? And he says, almost half. And I said, all right, interest and property taxes are tax deductible, which means you no longer pay taxes on that money. And that came to about $3,500. And I said, all right, so let's take $3,500. How much do you make? And I said, let's subtract $3,500. And it turned out that he was going to be saving about $1,700 a month in taxes. And I said, so that's true. So you just take your mortgage statement into your HR department and they will adjust the dependents. And then your take-home pay will rise tremendously by, in this case, about $1,700. Now, generality, of course. But I said, you get a pay raise when you buy a house. People don't realize that. And then I said, also, over the last 38 years, homes in California have appreciated, now 38-year history, an average of 6.77% per year.
Wow.
Well, let me ask you, whose money is that?
That's ours. That's my
And
money.
he said, he said mine. Yeah, if you own the home, it's going to be somebody's, but it's yours. So then I put that in there too. And when you put all those things together at the end of the expense, like when I take the payment minus the principal, minus the tax savings, minus the appreciation, it comes out as a negative number, which means that you're actually getting paid to live in your home.
Right.
Now, the check goes out every month, still $4,400. Don't be fooled. It is, but people don't see all the great things that come from that. And then I flipped it over and I said, let me tell you about my very first house that I bought. It was $249,000. And that was in 1999, right? And my payment was $2,600 a month. And I came from a rent that was $825 a month. So I tripled my expense to live. Wow. I sold that house a little over 2 years later. I got a check from escrow for $80,000. Now let's do the math. I owned that house for 2 years and a day at $2,600 a month. That's about $62,000. I got a check back from escrow for $80,000. So what that means is I got every single mortgage payment back. I got all the money back, plus I got $18,000 tax-free for living in my home. So when you own a home, you get paid to live in your home, whereas renters have to pay to live in someone else's home. So when I explained all of that to him and I walked him through everything, he was absolutely shocked. So I got him with a lender. He was fully approved, and he was out yesterday looking at houses with one of my agents. So within 60 days, the guy who said he would never be able to afford a home, within 60 days, my guess, he will be a homeowner.